You've got this.
Hi, today I want to show you how to make my go-to sourdough bread. This is the one that my family eats all the time. If you watched my last video, the perfect sourdough bread for beginners, that one is a fabulous basic bread. Keep making it if you love it, but this one is just a little bit of a variation and we like it even better. And so I want to show you how to do this. So what I'm going to do with my bowl on the scale, I'm going to turn that on, make sure it's in grams. I have my active starter, doubled and bubbly. So I'm going to use about 200 grams of starter. Again, it just doesn't matter. So in it goes. Ooh, 258, looks great. A little bit of extra starter means it's just going to ferment a little more quickly. A little bit less starter ferments a little bit more slowly. It just doesn't matter. So 258 grams of starter. Gonna clear that out again and put in 700 grams of water. This is for 2 loaves of bread. I'm just watching that scale. Ooh, 715, looks great. This, I'm gonna go ahead and mix up. I like a dough whisk, but you can use whatever you want. A spoon, your hand, a spatula. Dough whisk is just my personal favorite. So I'm gonna mix in that starter and water just to get it to dissolve and start to incorporate. It's just gonna make it easier to mix later. There we go. Now, the difference in this bread, I'm going to add a little bit of honey and a little bit of olive oil. What these players do, the honey, any kind of sugar or sweetness, is gonna cut the sourness of the bread a little bit, make it more of a soft flavor. So if you have someone in your family that doesn't love the sharp sourdough flavor, a little bit of sweetness is going to help cut that. You don't even need that much. So I'm going to add for 2 loaves. It's going to be about 15 grams, which looks like a nice little bloop. Just doesn't matter. And then for the olive oil, what it does is it makes the bread softer and it keeps it softer longer. So if you want the really crispy, crunchy outside, leave out your oil, leave out the fat of any kind. If you want it to stay softer longer, a little bit of olive oil or butter or some sort of fat is going to give you that softness. So a hearty bloop. We're gonna call that 30 grams for 2 loaves, but again, it just doesn't matter. A hearty bloop of olive oil is really all you need. So I'm gonna get that mixed up in there. Then this recipe has just a little bit less flour than the original recipe that I showed you in the original sourdough. Actually, I'm going to leave this over here because I don't want to forget the salt. Don't forget the salt. It's terrible without salt. So the original recipe that I showed you, it had the 200 grams of starter, it had the 700 grams of water, but it had 1,100 grams of flour. And in this one, I'm going to put in just a little bit less than 1,000 grams. So I usually aim between 975 and 1,000 grams of flour. So let's see where we hit it. Oh, 1008. There we go. Now it's 990. Looks great. So to this, I'm going to put the salt right on top. The reason I don't put the salt in mixing it up with all of the liquid ingredients is because if you put the salt in with the starter, it's going to bind it up and make it stringy and a little bit weird feeling. It will be totally fine, but it's going to be a little bit harder to mix. So I like to put the salt on top of the flour. And 22 grams of salt is exactly a tablespoon. In it goes. So much of sourdough just doesn't matter when you understand the concepts, but for heaven's sake, don't forget the salt. It's unpalatable without the salt. So it's one of the reasons I use the Himalayan pink salt, because I can see it and I know that I've put it in there. So I'm going to get this all mixed up with my dough whisk. I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so that is what your dough should look like. Nice and sticky, but still holding its shape. So this is what we call a good shaggy dough. This, because we have less flour than the last recipe that I showed you, this is what's considered a higher hydration dough, which just means it has more water in it. So it's going to be a little bit more sticky, but it's also going to lend itself to a little bit more of a soft bread, a little bit more of a softer and more open crumb. So the differences in hydration will produce differences in the final product of bread, but it all turns out to be great bread. So this, the measurements that we used, it's going to turn out to be about a 73% hydration loaf for those of you who like the numbers, but this is what it looks like. So I'm going to cover that and let it sit for about 30 minutes before the first round of stretch and folds. And because we used the starter, I'm going to go ahead and feed it now. So because I took out 250 grams, I'm going to feed it with about what I had taken out of it. Now what's left in that jar is just basically the scrapings, but believe it or not, that's going to amount to about 50 grams of starter. So as long as I feed it with at least as much flour as I have leftover starter, I'm good to go. So I'm going to feed it with just over 100 grams of water. 116 looks great. And then put the same amount of flour in. So I like to put my water in first and swish it around, and then put in the flour. Usually I have a great big spoon to do this in my kitchen, but I forgot to bring that up with me, and this is not my kitchen. Sourdough happens in real life, and real life doesn't stay clean like this. So this is a backdrop, and I got it for you and for my children, so I didn't have to keep kicking them out of the kitchen. Now I forgot to restart my scale, so let's do some quick math. 116 doubled, that's 232. Yeah. 248. There we go, 232. Just gonna get that mixed up. Boom, looks great. Now that can be left to ferment to be ready for our next baking adventure. Also, in my last video, there were several of you that had a very hard time with my hair being down and were very concerned about it. And so I want you to know I really considered pulling it back for this video, but I just couldn't do it. But I did think about it. All right, it's been about 45 minutes since we mixed this up. There's nothing magical about 30-minute rest periods. All you want to do is give it some time to relax so that when you go and you mix it again, it can then tense up and then relax. And that's the purpose of the waiting, the 30 to 45 minutes to an hour in between the stretch and folds or the coil folds, which is what I'm going to be showing you now. So in the last video, we did stretch and folds, which with your hands wet so that the dough doesn't stick, you would go around the sides and up over the center. That's a stretch and fold. But for a coil fold, which is what I like to use with a wetter dough like this, a higher hydration dough, it's basically the same thing, but upside down. So you're going to grab the dough around the center, pick it up, and then let it fall over itself. You'll do that on all the sides. Coil, fold. So you can already see that the dough's getting smoother and more elastic. I'm going to do just a couple more folds. You can keep folding until you start feeling a nice resistance in the dough. You don't want to do so much that it starts tearing, but what this coil fold or stretch and fold is meant to do is it's building up the gluten bond strength. So it's stretching it out and then folding it back over. It's stretching it out, and so it can reform on top of itself and give it that gluten bond strength to give you the nice oven spring. So you just want to do it a few times until you get that nice resistance in the dough. Then we'll let it sit until next time. After 30 more minutes or so, we'll do another round. And here is an up top view of those coil folds. Around the middle, fold. Around the middle, that's stretching it out and folding it over. That's what we're looking for. Coil and fold, Coil and fold. You can see how it's already getting jiggly and smooth, that nice big air bubble. This is looking good.
I see the air bubble.
All right, now we're ready for the third set of stretch and folds. Look how good that's looking. It is getting jiggly and smooth. So we're gonna go ahead for the third set of stretch and folds around the center. Not stretch and folds, coil folds. I could stretch and fold if I wanted to. You can do whatever you want. All we're doing is developing the gluten structure here. You can use whatever method makes you happy. There we go. So this is the third set, and honestly, it's looking pretty good. There is not a magic number to how many sets you need to do, but you know you can stop when your dough passes the window pane test. So you take a little bit of the dough, stretch it out, and if you can get it nice and thin to where you can see light through it, I don't know if you can see that light, but I can because there's a light right there, then you're good. So this dough looks pretty good to me. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna let it finish its bulk fermentation. Bulk fermentation starts when you mix everything up with the starter. So it's going to start then, and it ends when it has risen by about 50%. So that's gonna be different timing wise, depending on the temperature of your room, how much starter you've used. So you really don't need to read the clock as much as you need to read the dough. So when this has finished rising by about 50%, from the original mix-up volume, and it's jiggly and got little bubbles in it, which this is pretty close, then that's how I know we'll be at the end of the bulk fermentation period and we can move to the next step. All right, we're at the end of bulk fermentation. Our dough has risen by about 50% of when we started. It's jiggly, starting to smell nice and fermenty. You can see the bubbles through the surface here, but it still looks like it's got some good tension in there. The skin isn't looking like it's gonna fall apart. So that's what we're looking for the end of bulk fermentation. Now today, it's a nice warm day, so it took about 4.5 hours to get from start to the end of bulk fermentation. But if this was the middle of winter and a cold day, this could have taken all day. So you really can't watch the clock, you read the dough. And the dough is telling me it's 50% risen, jiggly, ready to go. So what we're going to do, we're going to do a traditional boule. So that's where we're going to shape this. And I'm sure you've seen some videos where they do the fancy pulling out and rectangle and shaping, but you know what? I'm not going to go to all of that trouble right now. We are just going to put some surface tension in there by tucking it under. A lot of people say that you want to put the smooth side down so that when you turn it over, it rises nice and smooth. But honestly, I've gotten good results from seam side down also, so it just doesn't matter. I am going to, after making that tension in the ball, I am going to just lay this seam side down in our Banton basket. You can use a bowl, whatever you have on hand. I am using a tea towel liner, and then I've covered it with a little bit of cornstarch to keep it from sticking. I don't use the regular flour to keep that from sticking to the towel because I don't want any unsoured flour on my bread because I do have the gluten intolerance. So I'm just going to cover that up loosely with the towel and then cover it with a shower cap. This I'm going to leave out on the counter for 30 minutes to an hour just to start puffing, to keep going in its fermentation process before I put it in the refrigerator. It's going to stay in there for a day or two just until I'm ready to bake it. So the thing to keep in mind here is how much fermenting this still has left in it. So we have risen by about 50% right now. It's got another 50 to 100% rise in it. That's what it's got to give. Then once it gets to the end of that, that's when the bonds are going to break completely. Those gluten bonds will break completely. And that's when your bread falls back down. So it's got a good rise left in it. So I'm going to let this rise on the counter for 30 minutes to an hour before putting that in the refrigerator. But this is what I'm really excited to show you. This is how I bake most of my bread loaves for my family, just in a loaf pan. And I'll show you what that looks like after I wet my hands. Okay, nice wet hands. So when you let your bread dough rise in a loaf pan, it's going to be ever so slightly different than it would be doing it in a Bantam basket where you're going to cook it in a Dutch oven and it's going to get good oven spring. In the loaf pan, we're just going to make it into a nice little log with some surface tension there. I have parchment paper in this loaf pan to keep it from sticking. You could use spray or oil, but I find the parchment paper just works best for me. You find what works for you, but then that's laying in the loaf pan and it's about half full right now. So before I bake this, I want it to rise all the way to get nice and puffy, doming this pan a little bit so that if it stayed right where it was when it was baked and didn't rise at all, I would be happy. It will still rise a little bit in the oven, but it's not going to give you the big oven spring that a Dutch oven boule will give you. So in order for this loaf to be nice and fluffy, I need to let it rise before I bake it. That's going to be the key trick to getting a loaf of sourdough to be fluffy and soft. If I were to just put this in the refrigerator and bake it like I would a boule in the oven, it's going to be very dense. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'll put that shower cap on there. I love shower caps, you guys. They're the best covers. So I'm going to put that shower cap on there and I'm going to let it rise on the counter tonight until it's time to go to bed. I'll probably be going to bed in 2 hours or so, which isn't going to be quite long enough for it to finish rising. So I'll put it in the refrigerator when I go to bed. And then in the morning, I'll take it out and I'll let it rise in a warm place until it's fully risen to where I'm happy with it. And that's when we'll bake it. So I'll show you what that looks like in the morning. But for now, I'm going to leave both of these on the counter, this one for about 30 minutes or to an hour. Then I'll put him in the refrigerator. He doesn't have to rise all the way. He's good where he's at. This one, I'm gonna let it rise on the counter until I go to bed tonight and I'll put it in the refrigerator. And in the morning, I'll take it out and let it finish rising, but I'll let you in on that whole process. So here we go. And this is what the bread looks like after a night in the refrigerator. So you can see it's risen just a little bit, but not very much. All right, so this morning I took out the bread from the refrigerator and I put it in my microwave with the light on, the surface light, because that makes the microwave nice and warm. And I wanted it to rise pretty quickly because we are out of bread and we needed it. But then I went on a walk. So this actually rose a little bit more than I would have normally let it go, but perfect is not the criteria for good bread. So this one you can see it's risen above, it's domey. It's got these giant air bubbles, which tells me it's getting close to overproofing, but still perfectly great bread. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take my kitchen scissors and pop the big bubbles, because in the oven, the big bubbles will create giant air pockets, and that's not what you're going for. And then I like to just snip down the center because there are air bubbles that like to hide right in there and they make really funny pockets. And then I'm going to pop it in the oven. I preheated the oven to 425 degrees. So I'm going to put this in here. And at the same time, I will pull out the preheated Dutch oven. The 425 degrees, that can flex. A high heat like that is going to give the initial burst of that high heat to make the bread rise before the crumb starts to solidify. So that's why the high heat is nice for the bread loaves to help it rise more. But the high heat also makes the crust a little thicker, a little crunchier, a little browner. So depending on what you're baking, that's going to be where your temperature goes. So the 425, that can change with what your goal is, but that's the temperature that I like to use. Grab the Bantam basket with the loaf that we made yesterday and put in the refrigerator overnight. This one, as you can see, has risen a little bit, but not quite as much as the loaf that we brought out, and that's great. I see some bubbles in this guy too. Just gonna give them little snips. This, I happen to have a silicone baking mat. You can use one of these if you have it, but if you don't, you can either put in some oil or some spray into your Dutch oven, or you can use parchment paper, and that's what I would be using if I didn't have this, but I do, so I'm gonna use it. Out it goes. I am using a lamb for my scoring. You could use a regular razor blade, you could use your kitchen scissors, you could just leave it without any scoring at all. It just doesn't matter. But I'm gonna give it a nice deep score right here. The way to get that smooth is to kind of think of it as an upward pull instead of a drag. So that upward pull motion is going to give you that nice smooth score. And then I'm going to do a really, really light one here just to put some decoration on it, because why not make it pretty? Boom. All right, and now this is going to go into the preheated Dutch oven. The reason for the preheating is to give it extra high heat burst, just to get that heat nice and close to it. Up it goes, in it goes, nice and settled. Cover it up. Covering this bread is going to trap the steam inside, and that's what's going to give you the classic shine on your sourdough loaf. Not necessary, just pretty. In that one goes. So the bread in the Dutch oven is going to cook for 20 minutes with the lid on, 20 minutes with the lid off, and the loaf is going to cook for about 30 minutes. So I'm going to set this timer for 20 minutes, and I'll show you what that looks like when we take off the lid, and we'll just continue from there. It's been 20 minutes. Here we go. Look at the rise on that loaf on the right. We're going to take the lid off of this Dutch oven and see how that goes. Ooh, looks great. All right, so this loaf on the right is going to take about 10 more minutes of cooking and 20 minutes for the one on the left. I'll show it to you soon. All right, you guys, the loaf pan is done. So the way you check it, the internal temperature of a sourdough loaf that's completely baked is going to be between 190 and 200 degrees, but that's also the same as the skewer test. And it goes out clean. There's some little crumbs on there, but no gunk. So this one's good to go. We are going to pull it out of the pan. Oh, carefully. Right away. If you leave it in the pan, condensation will form around the outside and it will make it soggy and wet. We don't want that. So you're going to pull it out of its pan right away so that it can cool. And it's very important to let it cool completely, or at least to just very mildly warm before you cut it, because while it's cooling, it traps in the steam, and the steam will continue solidifying the crumb. So if you cut it early, it's going to have a gummy crumb, which is fine, but it's not quite as wonderful as a nice solidified crumb. So that's why you want to wait to cut into it. If you just can't stand it, don't worry about it. Cut into it, but expect a gummy crumb. So we'll let that guy cool while we're waiting for the last loaf to come out of the oven. I would also love to see pictures of your real kitchen. This is my real kitchen where I love all my family with all the delicious food that I get to serve to them. So I would love to see pictures of where your life happens. You can post them in the comments. And here's the last loaf. Let's check it out. Lovely. Okay, we'll check that internal temperature with our skewer test. Looks great. Out it goes. Oh, check that out. We're gonna let this cool before we cut into it also. And there's our bread. Happy baking.
You've got this.